Wonderful. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to introduce Dan Clark. He's the director of the MSU Extension Local Government Center. He works with community groups and governments all across the state in all sorts of things, helping them run their meetings better, make sure they're not breaking the law. And in one of the things he has a lot of experience is decision-making tools. So Dan, thank you for being here. We're really excited to hear what you have to share. We'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Katie. Appreciate the invitation, and I think this leadership series is a great idea. So I'm glad to be a part of it. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you and share a few thoughts about decision making and how we use decision making uh, within our groups or organizations or even as communities. Um, so let's get started here with my slides. If I advance them. Here we go. So what I want to talk about a little is start out with attributes of a good policy. And just some frameworks I think to initially talk about. And I think any group or organization that's making decisions, or what I call in my world is policy. How do we go about that? What should we be considering when we're making decisions? We'll talk a little bit about how to decide to decide. You know, what's the process? A little bit on the theory of change. How do we use Robert's Rules of Order in a more informal setting? Robert's Rules is very formal, so how do we use that in a less formal setting? And then some tools that we like to use in consensus. I'll do this all the time in meetings just to get a pulse of the group. How are they feeling? Are we ready to move on or not when we're engaged in facilitative conversations or planning or something else? That how do we know when it's time to move on to the next topic? And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about setting priorities for action. Just another way a community can align themselves around some energy that's going on in their community. So that's what we're going to talk about today in the next 20 minutes or so. So I want to talk about this good policy making. What goes into making good decisions? And maybe I want to reframe that in this context is what's a good decision-making process. So here are some of the things that I have found to be very helpful as groups consider whatever the decision that they're making. Is the decision they're making environmentally sound? Does it have some sort of an impact on the environment? And is it sustainable in the decision that we're making? So I want you to be kind of thinking about, in that whatever context you have, is there an environmental component, and are we making good decisions around our environment? Next is the decision publicly acceptable? Does the public know or understand? And the decision we're going to make, how is it going to impact the public? And are they with us? Are they at least aware of the process or the decisions that are being made on their behalf? And is there some level of acceptance within the community or within the broader quote unquote community, being your membership or the organization? Is there a political willingness to act? Is the group that's making the decision willing to step into the space and make a decision? Or is it a third rail? Is it a hot potato? Is it something we really don't want to deal with? So we'll talk a lot about it, spend a lot of energy around the issue, but at the end of the day, no one's going to commit. And if that's the case, then just move on to something else. If not, if there isn't a willingness to act and follow through on that action. Are we using the best science available? Are we seeking out and making sure that this makes good scientific sense in a way? If it's got a scientific component to it, make sure you're using good data and information that's available. Is it financially viable? Do we have the resources to follow through? Resources to implement, whatever it might be, but is it financially viable? Are we following an ethical process? Are we being transparent? Are we making sure that we're not making decisions that are for our own personal best interest and not for the greater good or the greater group or the community? And then finally, is the decision we're making equitable over time? We often use this as an example in communities that maybe have artificially suppressed the full cost of their water or sewer infrastructure. And they have then their historic suppressed rates have really pushed the burden of maintaining that infrastructure onto a future generation, so that the previous generation could maintain a more affordable or a cheaper access to those infrastructure resources. And so we really want to make sure that when we're making decisions, that we're not just making decisions for our own convenience, but we're really looking at, is this equitable over time? And we're not placing a burden on any one generation more so than another. So those are some of the things that I think is a framework for a group to work in. I also like this other framework. It's a little more tight in that when we're dealing with a particular issue, let's debate it, let's explore it, see what this looks like. Then we can negotiate once we get an understanding of what the decision space there is. What is it that we're trying to work? I guess what are with all the different components, aspects, perspectives, and that's where the debate comes in. Then you can negotiate the terms as you all try to have to find some level of compromise and give and take to find a space where you say, okay, I think we can all agree on this, make a decision, and then figure out how we're going to apply it or implement that decision. So those are the four main components, I think, of the decision-making framework that I use all the time, and that we when we work with organizations or groups or facilitating conversations, that's usually the process that we're using. Then this issue of deciding how to decide. That's worth sometimes a conversation when you're maybe as a loose-knit group. It might be worth the energy to at the beginning say, hey, what does success look like at the end of this conversation or this process? And then how are we going to decide on what we're going to do as a result? If it's just a collection of people, if we all agree, we nod our heads and say, yes, let's do that, to something more formal where we're going to make a motion, we're going to second it, we're going to debate it. Anywhere within that framework, you've got to decide how you're going to make your decisions. Who has authority for our group? Who can make decisions on our behalf when we're outside of this framework? Is there someone within the group that's going to lead the conversation or facilitate the conversation? And if so, by virtue of stepping forward and occupying that space of being, I'm going to facilitate this meeting or this discussion, do they then abdicate their ability to participate? Do they give up their chance to weigh in? And if they do weigh in, are they making sure their thumb is not on the scale if they're also facilitating and utilizing the tools to move the group along and not using those tools to further their own interests? And so it's really important that groups may realize that, look, in order for us to make a decision, we ought to bring someone from the outside in just to facilitate it, because I don't think any one of us could be neutral enough or have such passion and interest in the issue that we're not willing to step back, leave our interests aside in order to facilitate the conversation. So I think some of that is really important for groups to make these decisions early on. How are we going to decide? What does a decision, a final decision look like? Who has authority, and how are we going to facilitate our meeting? What else have we got here? So the theory of change. Here are some things that I've come across over the years that I think are pretty helpful. That complex problems call for many kinds of solutions. You wouldn't be having the conversation if there was an easy solution. It's probably just not one thing that's going to fix it, but it might be multiple efforts, initiatives, many different people doing a variety of different things. And so those complex issues take a lot of conversation, a lot of people coming to the table with a variety of backgrounds. So when all kinds of people develop relationships, new ideas emerge. And so you got to bring the other into the conversation, someone else that has a different perspective. That may change the dynamics of the group, but it's important to hear those other perspectives and ideas in order to get good outcomes from the conversation. And when people consider an issue from different points of view, they uncover common ground and find better solutions. So that diversity of conversation, diversity of thought is really important when you're engaging in group dynamics. Going on, when people have a voice, they're more likely to participate in carrying out the action or the ideas of change. So the more people or the different people you get, either one, more or different people to the table, having conversations, I think when people engage and participate, they share their ideas, they have a little bit of what we call skin in the game. They've got spit on the paper. That's the one I like to use. I got a little spit on the paper. I've got some commitment. I've got some contribution here that is part of the overall outcome and solution. And when that's the case, I'm more willing to participate in carrying it out rather than having a group of people showing up and say, hey, this is what I think you need to do. And then I walk away not owning any sort of the outcome. So it's really important to invite people in, have them share, but also give them opportunity to carry out those contributions that they've made. And then change is more likely to happen when individual and collective actions are tied together. So uh, when you get a lot of people together, some people within that group will say, you know what, I can do this without having to work with the whole group. I can take the initiative. I can change something about myself in my community, how I approach my community, how I engage people around me. I can make that change. And it's helpful to know that others are also trying to make that change. So joining that collective and individual action is really effective. So here's another process, another steps I like to talk about is dialogue, deliberate, and act. So we come together and we're debating, we're dialoguing, we're trying to get our heads wrapped around what is the extent of this particular issue. What's its reach? How far is it? So we can kind of frame it out. What I like to say is there's sideboards to this discussion. And so we talk about what are those sideboards? Is there a no-go area? How far can we push this? And you really kind of see the full breadth of what the issue is. Then you deliberate on it. And you're trying to figure out, well, okay, so now that we understand the big picture, what is it that we can do? How do we move forward? What's within our ability to act? We may not be able to do all things, but what things can we do? And that's what the deliberation starts narrowing some of the ideas down. And you start creating, well, what if we did this? We have plan A, plan B, plan C. And then you can start debating whether A, B, or C would be better or worse. And then you come to some sort of a conclusion or action. You make an agreement. All right, we've chose plan B. Now let's start implementing it. And what I like to say is oftentimes is follow the energy. Where's the energy in the room? And harness that energy where people get really excited and motivated. I would try to encourage the group to kind of coalesce around the energy that's again where people are more willing to act and participate and follow through rather than just say, well, here's my idea. It's up to you now. You're responsible for doing something with it. And here's beware of the groan zone. This is where this space between what we said here, the divergent thinking and the convergent thinking. That's what we call the groan zone. And it's where people get frustrated about either the content that you're discussing or the process that you're trying to follow. And people get really anxious in that space. And it's not uncommon for people to say, look, it's too much, I'm out. And if you can encourage people to stick around, navigate effectively that groan zone, that transition from divergent to convergent thinking, right? If you can navigate that well and get people through it, then I think it'll work well for you. And this is one of the challenges. If you deal with the real colors, we do real colors as a temperament assessment that we work with organizations a lot with. And it identifies people that by colors. But for those of you that understand this language, those that are green, they may want to sit there and continue talking, debating, and exploring the ideas. Golds might want to just make the decision. Oranges, they're like, I'm already doing stuff. I've already started acting. I'm moving forward. Or the blues are really concerned about people's feeling. Are we all, involved? Is everybody participating? Making sure everyone's heard. So I know different people are going to respond in different ways in this groan zone. So just being aware of that and being able to speak their language to engage them and keep them participating. So this is kind of what it looks like in a graphic. This is the best way I can explain how this could look. So when you're dealing with this divergent and convergent thought process. So this is where you're dealing with a new topic. You got your typical options as the low hanging fruit, the easy stuff that you can come with, but you continue conversations, continue discussing it, and you get bigger ideas, bigger thinking, more creative, innovative, unique ideas. And then you get that groan zone, right? Where it's like, wow, we got a whole lot of stuff on the table. Then you got to start figuring out, how do we start narrowing this down? So what is possible? What are options? Start using some of that framework I was referring to earlier. Is this the best science available? Is there a political willingness to act? All those things can help you narrow down in the convergence side, um, until you can get to a point where you say, hey, this is what we've got. We've got the diamond. Are we ready to make a decision with our diamond here? And that's that convergent thinking. So just as you're aware of this, you can kind of navigate a group or a dynamic, an organization through this dynamic process of, yeah, we want to explore it, but then we need to come back to this convergent thinking using some of these frameworks to help you get to a point of decision. This is another way to help you through that process, using the idea model. What are the issues? What are the key concerns around the issues? You know, that's the debate, the dialogue, the deliberation. Is it doable? What's the effectiveness? Are we able to act and create the change we want? Do we have the available resources and assets available to us to make it happen? And does the action make sense? Are we willing to do something about this? Is there enough energy around the outcome for us to move forward with it? So that's the idea model. Now I just want to talk about now when we're trying to get decisions, right? Now this is about making decisions. And so it's not uncommon for people to use Robert's rules, which is fine. It's a way in which you can make decisions in a fairly efficient way. Some of the downsides of it is it's a majority rule. You're making sure that there's a majority of people that are available. It doesn't necessarily generate a lot of creativity, but it's a very orderly way of making a decision. But it's not designed to really explore that creativity of the group. And it's really designed for very large groups. How does a large group make a decision? But if you're a small, dynamic, 5, 10, 15 member group, you may not need the formality of Robert's rules. So I like to use the framework of Robert's rules. If you're interested in just having a majority rule, that's okay with you. The thing that I like to use, and we'll use this in maybe like a fair board or a tree board or some board that's serving a community, is I explain or try to teach this friendly amendment concept. The idea in Robert's rules is when you make a motion and then it's seconded, once the motion is seconded, it no longer belongs to the motion maker, but it belongs to the whole group. And if you ever want to change, modify, or amend that motion, you need to go through the formal amendment process. So there's a space in between the motion being made and the second being made that you can ask for, is everyone okay with this motion? Does anyone want to share or make a suggestion on how we can make it better? If you utilize that space, if it's okay with the motion maker, right? So you can say, well, I'd like to make a friendly amendment. If the motion maker would be willing to change the date from the first to the second, I would be all in favor for that. Oh, and if we could start by noon, would the motion maker be willing to start at noon to that motion? And you can kind of negotiate what that final motion might look like in that space between the motion being made and the second being made. And then once the second's made, then we can all go through, say, yes, I'm in favor of this, and let's vote on it. So it's just a little trick you can play with using the Robert's Rules framework between that motion being made and the second being made. The other one I like to use, this is real simple, the thumbs up consensus. And I'll often do this with a group. I can feel, if we're facilitating a meeting, you can feel the energy starting to, they're getting tired, they're wearing out a little bit. And I'll say, hey, look, is it time for a break? And some people are like, no, let's just push through. Some people are like, yeah, I'm exhausted. And so we'll just say, hey, quick, thumbs up. Are you okay with the break? I can live with the break. Nope, let's keep going. And you just use that thumbs up, middle, or down to decide on a quick decisions. You can use this for making big decisions, but oftentimes I use it as a way for making maybe a series of small decisions. All right, let's do the thumbs real quick. Who's in favor of it? Who can live with it? Who's utterly opposed? And if you get someone that gives a thumbs down, we need to continue talking and working on it until we can at least get everybody at a sideways or a thumbs up. So it's just another quick way, another tool to use, quick thumbs. And then you can take it to steroid level, the fist to 5. And I like this one because it really shows the gradient of where people are in the room, and you can decide as a group, are we okay with a third of the group only having a one finger up, right? We can maybe force it through, but maybe we really need to have a longer conversation. Or if we still have some people with the fist, it's like, no way, I still am not on board with this. We need to talk about it more. And this can help you lead, and it's less of a majority rules, but more of a consensus building where you get a majority of the people in the room feeling like, yeah, the outcome, I can live with this. I was working with a community not long ago where the final decision maker said, we're not moving forward until we get consensus in the community, knowing that the consensus would never happen. So it was a way for them to defer making the decision because they realized that no one's ever going to come out and say, yep, we're all 100% in favor of this. So here's just a few tools you can use. Yep. And I'll go to the end. Oh, this is all good stuff. Ran out of time. There we go. I see Katie's joined us, so I will entertain some motions, some questions if you have any.
Great, thanks, Dan. And I have a feeling all that information you just kind of breezed through was really valuable. So if you're willing, we could get your presentation and perhaps share it out with the folks that joined us here today. And just a reminder, Extension, we're a public resource. So we're always happy to have these conversations with you and talk more specifically about the groups or the communities you're working in and with. But thank you for that, Dan. We do have one question here, and this is looking for ideas on how to bring a diverse group of folks together who've had difficulties in the past. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. So if you're bringing in, if you're the convener, if you're convening people, it wouldn't hurt to have, just before you bring the group together, just having some side conversations, just visiting with the folks where there's the tension before the meeting even starts, and just get a sense of where they're at, what they're feeling, their commitment to the group and the organization, the outcome. And if it's tension between individuals, which usually is the case, it's mostly about people rather than process. And so one of the things I find helpful, having that conversation ahead of time, so if you're convening people and feel some responsibility for the success of the outcome, having those side conversations ahead of time might give you a sense of what's the lay of the land, so that you come to the meeting, you understand the politics a little bit easier. But the other thing is having some good ground rules and a good process, and so that we're not going to devolve into the negativity or the personalities, but really stay committed to the process, and allow the group to talk about the issues and not the people, so to speak. I find that to be helpful. Yeah. The other thing is sometimes you need to invite the elephant from the corner of the room out in the middle of the room and just say, let's just deal with this. If it is one of those process things where it is a fundamental aspect of the group that creates the tensions, it's a values issue. I value this organization one way, someone values it a different way, and they're not the same. And so we've just got to invite it in the room and talk about it, and get a space where people feel willing to divulge why is it that they feel the way they feel. And that's where you're going to find potentially that common ground. So
Great. Yeah, thanks, Dan. I would encourage you, next week, we're going to have Caitlin Anderson on, and she's talking about building cohesion and trust in groups. So I think we'll probably get a lot of strategies and ideas then. So I would encourage you to come on. Few minutes left, Dan. I have a question for you, kind of real, like, practical application. If you're part of a group that hasn't like actually agreed on this is how we're going to make decisions, how might you bring some of these ideas back and start that conversation to actually get a decision-making process in place?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, because sometimes people get frustrated without having a decision-making process in place. You end up just talking about the same things over and over, and the energy of the group, the momentum of the group really starts to diffuse and run out, because we haven't decided how to make a decision. And so we continue to stay in that washing machine mode where we're just churning around the issue. And so it might be, it's like, hey, what, how is it this, how are we going to settle on an outcome here? And just bringing it up. What does success look like for us? And that might start the conversation. If we think we have an idea of what success is going to look like in the near future, what do we need to do in order to get there? And that might lead the conversation into a decision-making process, right? So how do we actually decide we're going to take action and move beyond just the discussion phase? Because that's a safe space to be in the discussion phase. And once you make a commitment, you've eliminated all other options in a way. You've said, look, all these other things that we're not going to do, we're going to do this instead. And some people are reticent to make that transition into making a commitment. So have the conversation. What does success look like? And sometimes that helps.
Great. So Roger's asking, oh, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was just going to say one other thing you could do, which is really, is particularly when you have a lot of options, is not necessarily say we're going to do one, but you can prioritize those options. And you can say, look, we're going to do them all, but which one are we going to do first? And that allows the people that say, well, my option didn't make it out of the priority, but it will eventually get addressed by the group. And so it will allow them to stick in and stick with it because they know eventually it'll get to their issue, their item of passion. So that might be another thing, prioritizing. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Roger's asking if we can get the link to the tools. I'm not sure if those were cited on your presentation, but we'll try to make sure those are available as well. Let's take this one last question from Mary, just came in. How do you deal with rigid thinking in a group?
Yeah. That's always a challenge. And the rigid thinking. So how do you introduce new ideas? How do we create a space within the group to where a new idea can be explored? And so sometimes with rigid groups, what I find to be helpful is just say, let's do a brainstorming activity, or where we can kind of break up and loosen up the rigidity and start seeing that those sideboards are really confined, that we have created and self-imposed on ourselves. But really, there's a whole lot of other options that are out there. We need to explore and create that opportunity for them to in a safe way, get beyond their rigid thought. And oftentimes, you've got to think about, why are they rigid? Why is it a fear? Is it the unknown? And if you can identify, why is this group so stuck in this rigid view of what this issue is, that might give you some idea of how to break that rigidity, and address the actual issue that's creating the rigidity. But I find brainstorming to be a really great way for people to kind of open up and get beyond their preconceived ideas.
Great. Thanks. And Mary and others, I would encourage you, if you haven't seen the previous trainings in this series, Allison Costa spent some time talking about facilitation tools. So there might be some ideas out there in our other recordings. I shared the link to that YouTube playlist. I think what I see most often in groups are folks are just, it's an open kind of free for all conversation. And when you can start to use tools and strategies that engage people in different ways, you can start to address things like rigid thinking or dominance by one or two people. So hopefully you can find some other things there. As always, you're welcome to reach out to any of us in Extension to talk about these further. Hope you'll join us again next week as we talk about building cohesion and trust. And look for that email coming out later this week or next week, and we'll share Dan's slides with all of you. But Dan, thank you for being here, sharing your wisdom. It's always appreciated. And thanks to the rest of you for showing up on this Tuesday morning. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.